Hey guys, welcome to part one of my chat with Ankur Bariku on Take a Pause with me, Varun Dugirala. I spoke to him about how he finds the motivation to create all the content that he does, what's the best advice he's ever gotten in life, and how he's really worked to build trust with his audience. All this and so much more in this part one of my chat with Ankur. Part two and part three are dropping soon, so hit subscribe and smash that bell icon. And now let's roll the clip. I'm actually going to start this conversation by saying me and Ankur have had a conversation before on a podcast, which was just before he did 321 on his rocket ship that became what Ankur Variku is today. And I'm like, was I too early in getting Ankur Variku on a podcast? Did we speak too early about so many things? I've decided to have a chat with him to kind of kick off, take a pause because I'm like, I've had to take a pause to digest everything that you're doing, Ankur. It's been incredible to see your journey, especially the last couple of years.
Yeah, thank you so much. Firstly, for having me back. It's such a joy. I'd say that you definitely then have an eye for picking up talent that is about to explode. So you clearly have a alternate career if you ever get bored of what you're doing right now. But the last 2 years have been very, very, very interesting and very gratifying in multiple ways. But I'm glad to speak about it and be back on the show.
Yeah, one of the things I want to start off by asking you is right is that to really be able to kind of do everything that you've done, especially across the content creator journey, and I kind of say that you're an entrepreneur creator because you've had an entrepreneurial journey. You treat your journey as a content creator as an entrepreneur. You call it a startup, uh, but I want to kind of go down deeper and say that where does the motivation come from? Where do you kind of, if you got to go deep down there and say, okay, this is what really motivates me to do what I do every morning, where does that really start from?
So you're right in that sense, Varun, that I am an entrepreneur at heart, and for the last decade, because I've built startups and more importantly, built organizations where very different kind of people come together and align themselves, hopefully, towards one common objective. That's a joy. I genuinely love building organizations and working with people and finding ways of navigating through that. And when this content creation journey happened, it was for me a blessing that the last 10 years were a training ground where I didn't take of this as, oh, let's have a flash in the pan
Mm.
viral stuff, let's do something which is crazy, let's do something which is going to get
Yeah.
us the eyeballs right away. But I was like, this is going to be a long term game and it needs to be process. So I think of creativity as a process, and I was like, let's get it done. But the question was, why would you
Yeah.
want to get it done? Like, what's in it for you? Like, why are you even doing it? Which is the question that you're asking. And there the thesis wasn't so clear when I started. I was experimenting just like I've experimented multiple times in my life, trying to figure out if there is an answer that emerges. And when I started to at least focus on that content creation journey, which was around March 2020, so slightly before when we last spoke, it was all across. I was like, hey, I have something to share, which is my years of experience and everything that's happened in my life. But I don't know who's going to appreciate it. And I don't know what are they going to
Mm.
appreciate it for. And that's what I have to figure out. So it's classic product building where you're not trying to sell what you've made, but you're trying to make what
Yeah.
people would buy. And I was just throwing things in the universe, whether it was on Instagram or on YouTube or on LinkedIn or on Twitter or on anywhere else. And suddenly I saw that of all the things that I was doing, where there were multiple signals coming in, there was a very strong signal coming in from 18 to
Mm.
24-year-olds, and specifically around three things. We have no idea how to manage our
Okay.
money, we have no idea how to manage our careers, and we don't want to admit it, but we have no idea how to manage our lives. And it's getting really, really hard. And what I realized was this was the same thing that we also struggled with, you and I. But life was somewhat simpler back then because choices were quote unquote limited. And we were somewhat living in a very
Yeah.
small world where our school and our colony friends were at best the comparison set. Like so Sharma ji ka beta, we knew that person. But today, Sharmaji's beta is this fictional character that exists on somewhere in the internet, whether it's a YouTuber making crores at the age of 12 or an Instagrammer making millions of dollars at the age of 9. And the comparison set has just exploded. It's the entire world. So what I realized was people are making choices in life out of
Mm,
ignorance and not awareness for no fault of theirs. And all that I wanted to do was just
mm,
make them aware. They ultimately will make the choices that they want to make, and they will learn their own way. But if it can come from a point of awareness, that works for me. So that's what I do. I think of myself
mm.
as a teacher who is just helping people become more aware in the choices that they make. And that's my sole driver. The manifestation of that will keep changing over years, but the why of this will remain, hopefully, the same.
You know, you make an interesting point, right? Is that when we try to share things that we've learned, there's a term I like to use, which is useless information. Because you've been told throughout our life, right? Ki this is useless. Like, why are you lying on the couch and watching MTV when you were a kid? Or why are you reading comics? Or why do you need to know what Mithun's dialogue in that movie was? And so on and so forth, right? I was a pop culture junkie growing up. I would always have these things at the back of my head. Right? And always told ki it's utterly useless. There's no point, but you don't remember what you're taught in class, uh, which is, I
Yeah.
think, a problem we all suffered from. So, but if you look at it today, knowing that information and sharing it in so many ways is, I think it's also opened up in that sense. But I also see people struggling with saying, okay, do I share it naturally or do I manufacture it? So, what is innately your information to share is a struggle I see a lot of people kind of going through. So, when you're kind of putting down something and saying, okay, this is something which I really want to share, because A, people want to hear it, but it's also like from whatever I've consumed of your content, I know for a fact it's all genuine. It's like it's coming from what you've learned and not from, oh, somebody said, okay, this is what is trending or this is what everyone's talking about, let's jump onto this bandwagon. um, and that requires a certain balance. So how do you look at that balance kind of coming in?
A couple of things helped there, Varun. One is the fact that you're not in the same age group as the audience that you're speaking to. You're not also their parents' age. You're
Yeah.
somewhere in the middle, right? So you're in that sweet spot where you would be that bade
Ah.
bhaiya figure, where and you will find Manish speak about bade bhaiya a lot because Josh just
Yeah,
thrives on
yeah.
that bade bhaiya identity, and I see it why. So you will have that bade bhaiya figure where someone who's 25, 30, or perhaps even 2021, they would shy away from calling me uncle, but technically I am
Hmm.
uncle for them. But they would call me
Yeah,
Ankur Bhaiya and sheepishly
yeah,
call me Ankur because I've
yeah.
said so. Don't call me sir or
Same
Bhaiya,
here. Yeah, I
whatnot.
agree.
What they know is here is this person who's gone through life. But then the second part comes in. This person understands us because he has gone through the same shit that we went through and thus empathizes with what we are going through as against
Hmm.
being dismissive. So unfortunately what most parents do is यार तुम्हारे को तो इतना आसान मिला है हम जब तुम्हारी उम्र में थे तो कितनी फाइट मारते थे यहाँ जाते
चल
थे
के
वहां
स्कूल
जाते
जाते
थे
थे,
ये करते थे वो करते थे
all that stuff.
करेक्ट राइट लाइक हम 5 किलोमीटर चल के स्कूल जाते थे हम घर के कपड़े धोते थे हम दूध की बाल्टी पकड़ के आधा आधा घंटा मदर डेयरी के सामने खड़े होते थे तुम्हें तो ये सब कुछ मिला है तब भी तुम रो रहे हो दैट्स that's by the
Yeah.
way a reality, but it's also dismissive because it's not their fault
Yeah.
that they were born in a world that took
Yeah.
care of them much better than their parents did. So I think the relatability plus the experience creates a very potent mix which works, and most people would not like. So I think in 2 by 2
Hmm.
matrices all the time, and think of that. X-axis is, are you experienced yet?
Hmm.
No and yes. And are you
Hmm.
relatable? No and yes. Most people who are creating content, who are the Instagrammers or YouTubers, are people who they'll be able to
Hmm.
relate to, but they're not
True.
experienced yet. So they will take it at face value, but they will also be easily dismissive of it at face value if they're like, ये
Correct.
क्या बोल रहा है? Like this, इस इंसान को कोई आइडिया नहीं है कि वो क्या बोल रहा है, बट वो बोल रहा है क्योंकि किसी किताब में या नवल रविकांत ने
हाँ,
ये बोला था, and that's
exactly.
it. And then there is this other end, which is our professors who are immensely experienced, but they're just not relatable. Like we just cannot have a conversation with them. And being in that sweet spot where you're both experienced and relatable, that's a hard one to do. But once it's done, I think it works magic. At least I can stand testimony to
Yeah.
that.
You spoke about being younger, and I'm struggling with, not struggling. I call myself a midlife crisis creator. I don't know if I can pull you into that same container or other category in that sense. But when you were younger, if you kind of think about, was there a specific point when was that? What are the best advice you got when you were younger? Right? 'Cause in many ways, I know, I know that the content veers towards advice in terms of uh, what someone like you puts out, but when you were younger, there was no one like you putting stuff out because there was no Instagram or YouTube. What was the best advice you got when you were younger, which you kind of used through the years?
I think I got most of my advices rather late in life, if I were to say 20s
Hmm.
to be late. Growing up, frankly, I did not have very sound advice coming in from
Hmm.
any corner. There was encouragement. People used to support me because I was like this above average, very diligent, very discerning kid, very respectful of elders, like the classic acha sa bacha, doing nothing wrong. So there was a lot of admiration and there was a lot of
Hmm.
encouragement with matched with my ambition, and I don't know where I got it from, but ambition to the extent of being audacious was something that was really helpful. And I think one big event in my life was dropping out of
Yeah.
my PhD and coming back to India, which made me realize, and this was not something that someone told me, but I realized it on my own, and I'm glad I did, was that what you're good at doesn't necessarily make you happy.
So true.
So what you're good at and what makes you happy could be two very different things. And the world will have you believe that if you're good at something, that's the only thing you should do because it will automatically make you happy. But that's not true. It isn't true and it necessarily wouldn't be true. So you have to find the intersection of what you're good at and what makes you happy. A lot of people in the world are living lives where they're good at something, maybe their work, maybe their relationship and whatnot, but it doesn't inherently make them happy. But they'll trick themselves into believing that that's what they ought
Hmm.
to be doing because someday they will get happy doing that. And I think one of the best advices that I did have come from somebody else was my first manager after my MBA school. I was a consultant, and my first project, Varun, was a project for a real estate company where I had to create the financial projections for the real
Okay.
estate company. And I sucked at accounting. I hated accounting. I had no idea why accountants were even born or accounting as a subject was introduced in the world. तो मुझे सर पैर नहीं है कि credit debit क्या होता है. I barely passed the exam in the MBA school, and I, not surprisingly, was a disaster in
Hmm.
that project. I would do something half-heartedly, and my expectation was if I make a mistake, my manager will pick that mistake up,
Yeah.
point it to me, I will fix it like the discerning, diligent kid, and the world will be
Correct.
happy. And that kept happening. I made mistakes, he fixed it. I made mistakes, he fixed it. He was very patient with me. And then on this one on one call, he said, which has just stayed with me all my life, he said, Ankur, if I can't trust you, it doesn't matter how smart you are.
So true.
And that hit like nothing else did because, like, oh shit, now it makes sense. He's like, I can't trust you. Like, whatever work you put out, I can't trust you. I have to look at it to make sure it is error free. And that means you bringing me down to your level and not allowing me to scale up to a higher level. And that will never work, irrespective of how smart you are or how well intentioned you are. And I think that has stayed with me, especially in the Indian context where operating with trust and building something which is trust first has become
Yeah.
sacrosanct. And I use that, as crazy as it sounds, in the entire content game that I played the last 2 years, which we may want to discuss if we want to. And it's worked fabulously well. But yeah, those one advice that I figured for myself, one advice that I was thankfully given, that'd be my early advice.
You speak about trust, right? And I think that's an important factor. And you mentioned it. Your creator journey has almost had, like, I wouldn't say popular, but I would say every creator who kind of resonates with an audience has one fundamental thing. So they have a few foundational layers, right? One of the layers you have is trust, because people genuinely trust what you're telling them, that you're coming from a place, like you said, you're coming from experience, and they're still connecting with you as a human being. So as you look at that trust kind of coming into it, how did you kind of, if you look at how you started off, I remember your LinkedIn content. I was a early consumer of your LinkedIn content. So I've actually seen that transition from how you initially were creating content, before obviously kind of scale out all of these things. But I think some things have been consistent, that you always spoken about something that was inherently coming naturally to you, putting it out in the way it was coming. The fact that you don't edit out is one thing which I've noticed. As someone who worked in video production for a large part of his career, I'm like, this part could have been maybe edited out. but I let that go because I think that's the way you genuinely are. So how have you looked at trust, especially with an audience? Like when you look at that entire trust piece kind of coming in, what are your almost like things to tick off to make sure that trust is always there?
As I said, trust is, and I'm so glad that you see it. It seems to me then it's somewhat not hidden behind, but somewhat obvious. Trust is one of the strongest foundations of not just this content play, but the way that I live life. I start with trust. So I trust people before I need to evaluate them. And I would always do things that will allow people to trust me over time, if not immediately. And when I started building the content game, again, the idea was how do you make it not just into something that you enjoy doing, but something that can also become a career, a profession, and eventually some sort of a enterprise which can grow by itself. And it's not a charitable enterprise; it's a for-profit enterprise that makes it happen for people. And the idea was when you're building this community, you have two options always. You either build this community to sell something, or you build this community to
Hmm.
generate trust. And I was very clear from day one that we are always going to build this community for generating trust. What does that mean? That means that everything that I share will be authentic and will come from my own life experiences. There'll be fumbles, and I will just
Yeah.
let them be. There will be things that I will say which may not be politically correct, but I'll just let them be because they're my views. I will make mistakes, and if they go out, I will admit to them first up. There will be people who will troll me, call me out, and I'll always be respectful. My content will never try to gain at someone else's expense, whether it's making fun of them or rejecting them or dismissing them. I do make a lot of fun about fixed deposits, but I think that that is a little factual and not something which is subjective. And and those were the components of it. And if this does work, which was a big question mark when we started, but if this does work, then at no point of time will I ever
Hmm.
sell something. Definitely not something that I want people to buy of my own. So I may work with a brand and introduce them, and that'll only be brands that I
Yeah.
personally use. So I made some classic mistakes early on where, for the chase of money, let's just work with brands because it's happy, nice money. And then when I quickly realized I was going against what I wanted to do, so I backstrapped and I said, no, we're only and only going to work with brands that I personally use or whose founders I am personally friends with, because then I have known them for years and I can
Yeah.
vouch for that, and just see where that goes. And that helped because when I started, which was the first test of building this as an enterprise, I started my entire marketing funnel, which was ads on Google and Facebook and wherever else, which are fairly aggressive and a lot of people are annoyed by it. The way that it works is those are the ones that are creating this distribution that I want to reach out to. And when they see those ads, they most likely do not know of me because I'm not an important entity. In that cocoon of ours,
Yeah.
we may know each other, but the broader world does not care two hoots about Ankur Warikoo. But when they see that ad and they question, who is this guy? And they go look me up, they'll just see years and years and years of authentic content without ever trying to sell anything to them. And that was the machinery that I wanted to build. And it's worked. It's worked beyond my wildest beliefs. And thus, in some way, validates the confirmation bias that I started with.
You mentioned confirmation bias. I'm a person who loves to pick. I don't know why we all enjoy psychology, neuroscience, and psychology terms a lot more now. I'm like, I wish they taught it this way when we were in school or college. The same way how I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said if they taught us chemistry like how he's recently learned how to make cocktails, he said we would have been a lot more interested to look at it. But I feel that there's so much about learning that is inherently like what we really enjoy, but also like we tend to conform towards, okay, this is what how it's done, so let's just do this, everyone's doing this anyway. Hope you enjoyed this part of my conversation with Ankur Wariku. The other parts are dropping very soon, so don't forget to hit subscribe and smash that bell icon. And if you want to listen to the entire conversation, you can head to your favorite audio streaming app. The link is in the show notes, so check it out there as well. And stay tuned for a lot more content apart from this as well. But till the next one, cheers.